So by the fact that we can't fly with the harpsichord in our backpacks.
Right.
You can't do that.
You can't do it.
And with swallow, you are fighting so hard against what you're afraid of, which is essentially drowning, knowing that that's kind of what you have to do in order to get to the next step, that you're flying instead.
The other interesting thing about this, we're going to hear it shortly, is this almost like a prologue would be the song you need to hear lyrically, because your very first line, very much like O's very first line pretty much was so heavy-handed. Look what the diatribe that brought you into, just by saying I'm opheliac.
Diatribe,
here's history.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're like that French guy Camus, who's he's the guy talking about historical references.
Whoa.
But here, your very first piece here is you just set the tone. This would be your prologue. I'll tell you the truth.
Right.
All of
You're
my
right.
songs.
That is so very like on your opheliac, because by the fact that you say something like on your opheliac or I'll tell you the truth, you're putting something in the listener's face that they have to deal with right now.
Yep.
You can't sit back and listen. You have to deal with this.
It's saying everything that I'm about or you're about to hear is defined by this to a degree.
Right.
So here you go. That's pretty revealing. So what do you mean when you say that?
It's so revealing that I don't think anybody gets it or agrees, which is fine. But what that means is actually very literal, is that was a moment where I was trying to be extremely honest with myself about I know my tricks, even if you don't. So the things that, I find myself much more irritating than anyone else possibly could, because I'm the one that has to live with myself. I know not only what the songs sound like that I write and give to you, but I also know what the ones inside my head sounds like that you haven't even heard yet. And I know where they're different and where they're similar. And I know my tricks and I know my go-to things. I also know when I'm doing a photo shoot how to get the exactly right picture, because I know my angles. But that also, I'm disgusted by that, because I'm like, well, why do I try? Why do I have to try so hard to be perfect? But I know when I write what's going to... I don't know everything, and I don't know every emotional reaction you're going to have, but I do have my tricks that I just really like and that I keep doing. And we've talked about, there's little things, especially on the sweeter songs, where there's always that last note, and I'm always going to do it the same way. And by saying it in this song, I'm actually accepting it and saying, like, at this moment, looking at you, Ink, I'm like, I hope I never change that, because that is a signature, and that's okay. But the reality is that I don't think most people think that all my songs sound the same. But in my head, I hear these things that I always do, and I know it.
Because you know your
I know I'm onto myself, even if nobody else is, and that's good, and I hope it's always that way. But I am,
So then, if we start your beginning.
Oh, I love that low.
I know. But when it comes in and rocks you, right here.
Listen. Oh, God.
It's
That's
ominous.
Exactly what I wanted.
Ominous.
It's ominous, yeah.
So this is your...
And it contrasts that we have nothing. We have no floor. We're dancing on no floor. And then all of a sudden,
So now you go to You're Not a Fairy. That has to be a little bit of a wink towards your past. A little bit of a wink towards your past.
It is, and I felt weird writing and recording that part, because I know that it's such an obscure, like, either that will mean everything to someone or it will mean absolutely nothing. In the case that it means nothing, you're pretty much off the hook, because you can't really be criticized if nobody knows what the fuck you're talking about, right? Or unless they're reading a lyric sheet, they're not even going to understand what I'm saying.
Right.
But in fact, it was a direct reference. When I wrote the song, I wasn't thinking about recording it. I was just thinking about, I am writing a song, right? And I just wrote it to myself and thought, well, maybe this will never get recorded or it'll get changed or something. So I never thought that deeply about it. But at the moment, I was trying to explain to myself a couple of concepts. There's the swallow one, which we'll get to, but that one was about realizing that you've tried so hard all of your life to seem essentially special in some way. And that is not necessarily a problem, but what it does is that it makes you feel like you're invincible in some way. And you're a magical unicorn, you're a fairy, you're a whatever. And the thing is that I do believe in fairies, and I also know that I really used to be one. And at some point, which is what happens once you're locked up, is that, at some point you essentially lose your wings. That's just what life does to you. And maybe someday I'll get them back. I hope that I do. But I realize that I'm ridiculous, and I realize that having to go around life in fairy wings just to feel like I can live in this world that I usually don't feel terribly comfortable with.
Right.
That is what it took for me for a long time, as you know, because you knew me through all of that time, to get through. And I loved that, and there's nothing really wrong with that. But to be honest, I know that I have to deal with mortality and being able to be hurt and all of those things. And what fairy wings represented to me was, it sounds so much deeper than I think it looked to anybody at the time, but what it really represented to me is I am on a different plane and you can't touch me. You can't. And that's
It was
what
almost
that
like your
was
protection
that.
was really,
It
that was awful.
And now
too.
what my protection is the cheek, the heart on my
Right.
cheek. And
Your
but
shield.
Right, but what that is the absolute polar opposite, is the heart cheek thing. What that represents is reminding yourself every day when you put that on in the mirror, which is why I don't get it tattooed, is because the point is not the heart, the point is putting it on. And that time, those 2 minutes that you have with yourself, getting that right every day, that you remind yourself that you are mortal, that you are not invincible,
You're a precious,
that you are
fragile,
a person,
right
exactly, that you can be killed and you can be hurt and all of those things, and reminding you that you are human. When most of my life I've tried desperately to pretend that I was not, because to me that was potentially safer.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to have to deal with human things that I was faced with every day.
Which
and
makes
it's like
sense.
I wanted to escape my body
Sure,
so badly
escapism,
that I wanted to fly out of it. And that was how, metaphorically in my mind, I did, is to get away from that on my
Right.
fairy wings. Yeah.
But then you almost address it right here that you're this creature
Yeah.
representing more. You're,
No, that's
you're already
the thing.
saying
It's
yeah.
it's just saying I
Yeah.
need to be more than this. Yeah.
But you still wouldn't change it
That's the thing.
because you
Yeah.
still appreciate what it was. When it was
Right, because I still, and that's the thing, it's like, to be honest, I am a fairy.
Yeah.
More than that, I'm a changeling. I can look
Right.
different every day because I am different every day, and that's fine.
There's a little piece you said here after this beautiful cacophony of voices,
Thank you.
crumpets, asylum
Yes,
girls.
yeah.
Here they come. What's the 20 years reference?
That is, the 20 years refers exactly to about the amount of time in my life before the point where this song was written that had been the time where you start sinking. And that's just very literal. It's like at some point, and we get to that sort of in a Gothic Lolita song later
Right.
on, is where you say you can say it's not fair, you can say it's tragic or whatever, but it doesn't really matter. I think it's something that happens to a lot of people. At some young point in your life, everything starts going to shit. And you can deal with it as best as you can, and you can even come out okay at the end of it, but you know that there was a day where everything changed. And from, before the time of this writing, it was about 20 years before then.
Right.
And so it's 20 years sinking slowly.
Gotcha.
And when you finally find yourself needing to write a song like Swallow is when you are standing on the floor of the ocean and you're in an area where it's shallow enough that you can just barely stick your head out of the water, and if you turn your face to the sky, your mouth can just come out enough that you can breathe, but everything else is covered. And so technically one drop more in that ocean and you would be dead. And somebody comes along and says to you, well, just do this, just take that drug, just swallow this. And you don't want to take the drug, you don't want to, and that's why it comes at the beginning of this record. It's like, we'll never even get through this record if there are drugs involved.
Right.
I don't want to do this. I don't want to swallow this. I want nothing more in the world than to not swallow. And yet,
You're still saying
I'm
you
being
concede
told
to it.
I
if.
have to,
Right.
because I'm saying,
If it'll help.
I know I'm about to drown. So really, I have no fucking choice, and I'm smart enough to know it. So I'll rebel against.